Hi everyone, it's Katrina from the Alluring Bead Boutique, and welcome back to my design channel. I've been working on the Bead Weaving 101 on my website blog, and we've been working on brick stitch for the last several weeks. And we're working now on some advanced techniques for brick stitch. And today we're going to focus on brick stitch on a bead. So far we have covered flat brick stitch basics, where the beadwork naturally decreases as you work each additional row. We have worked through utilizing an increase on flat brick stitch so that you can create flat pieces that have the same number of beads on each row. We took a look at tubular brick stitch, and then the advanced technique of creating a continuous spiral using tubular brick stitch. And now we're going to take a look at how to do brick stitch on a bead. And once we finish that, we will look at brick stitch on a frame. And the final post will be a tutorial on how to use two concentric shaped frames and brick stitch to create a beautiful component. So to get started today, I am going to be using these 12mm glass pearls. I've got some 11-0 C beads, check glass C beads here, and I have some 11-0 Delica beads here. I've already made this cute little earring, and the full tutorial for the earring will be finalized over on my blog site. But today we're just going to go ahead and learn the technique of how to do brick stitch on a bead. So for today's project, you do not have to have these exact materials here, but if you would like to work on the earring, then you might want to get out some supplies that you would like to see in a project. So what we're going to do is we're going to thread on a little bit over like about a wingspan maybe of 0.006 fire line onto our thread. Then we're going to thread we're going to thread on our pearl and carry it down and just leave ourselves a couple of inches of tail. So as you know, with flat brick stitch, we create a ladder stitch base. And then to do the brick stitch rows, we utilize the thread bridges on top of our ladder stitch base to actually complete the brick stitch technique. But what we're going to do today is we're going to create some thread bridges on the outside of our bead. And that's how we'll get started. So the first thing we'll do is put thread our needle through our bead and carry it down and leave a few inches of thread. You want enough to hold on to and enough to maybe weave off or tie off at the end. We're going to take our needle and we're going to pass back through this bead 4 times. So this is 1. You can see I have a thread bridge here on the side of my pearl. I'm going to do it again because I want 2 on each side. So now I have 2 thread bridges here on one side of my pearl. I'm going to flip my pearl around in my hand. And I'm going to do the same thing again twice. I'm going to pass right through the bead and pull through till I have a thread bridge here. And then one more time until I have another thread bridge. So now I have my 2 sets of doubled up thread bridges on each side of my pearl. So as we begin our first few stitches with brick stitch, this tail thread does have a tendency to loosen up. So what I'm doing here is I'm just stringing on a stop bead to my tail thread, and I'm going to slide it all the way up until it touches against my pearl. And that's going to help me keep the tension on my thread bridges here as I work the first round of my brick stitch, and that's going to keep that thread from pulling loose as I work along. You don't have to do that. If you think you can maintain your tension, that's fine. I like to do it this way at least till I get 1 round of brick stitch to keep this thread bridge from pulling up away from the pearl. So now we're ready to do our first row of brick stitch. And if you'll remember from all of our basic tutorials with brick stitch, we always start out with 2 beads. So I'm going to pick up my 2 beads. I'll be working to the left because I'm left-handed and it's easier for me to sew around in this direction. So I've got 2 beads, 11-0 C beads on my needle. I'm going to take my needle and slide it under both thread bridges on this left side of my pearl. I'm going to pull that into position and hopefully not pull my beads through, which I did just pull my beads through. So I'm going to have to come back out underneath and bring those beads back around. I'm going to tighten up my thread bridges just by pulling really tight here. My 2 beads are still on the thread, so here we go again. I'm going to dive under these 2 thread bridges, and I'm going to pull forward until the 2 beads sit like this, side by side, on the back side of the thread bridge. Here's my working thread on the front. And it's a little bit fidgety, but just bear with it and you will get the hang of it. I'm going to come up through the second bead, just like we normally do, to stand it up. And then you can either straighten the first bead now, or you can wait till you come all the way around and straighten it when you connect it to the last bead of the row. If you've been working along with this series with me, you know I like to straighten it at the beginning. So I'm going to come down through the first bead. And then I'm going to go right back up from bottom to top through my second bead. And I'm going to pull. And that puts a thread bridge along the bottom of these 2 seed beads. And it helps me to pull those in nice so they stand up side by side. And I'm ready for my next stitch. So now we just go like we've been doing. We'll go to 1 bead at a time. I've got a bead picked up. I'm going to come under my thread bridges again, right next to my last bead. I'm going to pull the thread through until my seed bead sits right beside the second bead. I'm going to pass up from bottom to top and step up. Then I'm going to pull this bead so that it sits right beside the second bead I sewed on before. And I'm just going to repeat this step all the way around till I get down here to where the opposite end of my purl is, close to the tail, where I've got the tail thread. I'm just going to keep working. I'm going to pick up a bead, come under the thread bridge, position that bead, come up from the bottom to the top. Pull my thread straight out so that my beads sit side by side. Let me back out a little. Let's do it again. We're going to pick up a seed bead, come under the 2 threads. Pull it until the bead sits right beside the previous bead. Pass back up from bottom to top through that bead and pull the thread straight out. As you work, you want to make sure you try to keep your 2 sets of thread bridges on opposite sides of the purl. It's a little fidgety on the first row, but just, take your time and work to keep your tension even and to keep your beads lined up on an even plane. So I'm just going to keep working that same stitch, picking up 1, going under the 2 thread bridges, and stepping up, pulling my thread straight out, and trying to keep my thread bridges separated on the opposite sides as best I can. It is not that extremely important to do that part, but it does help later on. So we'll go ahead and work, and I'm going to work like this, just coming under that thread bridge and stepping up through that bead until I get to the opposite end of this purl where I have to figure out how to cross over the hole in the center of the purl. So let's do a couple more. We're going to pick up our seed bead. We're going to come under both thread bridges. Pull gently to position our seed bead, and then step up right through there. And I do have step-by-step photos and written instructions for this particular technique are also going to be on the website, and there'll be a link in the video to take you over there if you're having trouble discerning from the video what to do. So just keep going with those same 2 steps. And I won't sit here and make you watch me do every little tiny stitch until I get down there. But once I get to the bottom of the purl, I'll come back and show you guys how to cross the gap Just remember that the goal is to try to keep these beads lined up in a nice even line and not so tight that they pop each other off of that linear plane right there. So I've worked my way down, and I am right next to the bottom hole of this pearl. So now we have to determine whether we want to put one more bead on this side or if we're going to go ahead and skip over to the other side. So let's go ahead and pick up a seed bead, and I'll show you guys how to judge whether or not to add a last bead on the side before you cross over. So we're going to take this bead and we're going to lay it down here. We're going to pull the string around to the back like that. And we're going to see that if we go under right here and then come up through our bead like we normally would do to step up, that it's going to sit close enough to the previous bead without a huge gap. So I'm going to go ahead and cross the gap. And all I'm going to do that is I'm going to go under the 2 thread bridges on the opposite side of the hole in this pearl. I'm going to pull that bead into position just exactly like I've been doing. And you see that it sits nice and close to the previous one, so we're not going to have a big gap. So we can just go ahead and step up. And when we pull our bead into position, we see that it sits nicely beside the previous bead. There's a small little gap of thread, but it's not very noticeable. So I'm going to continue on. And now all I'm going to do is continue adding 1 bead at a time and come all the way down till I reach the first bead of my beadwork on this side. So you just pick up a bead, you come under both thread bridges, position the bead right beside the previous bead, and then step up from bottom to top and pull your thread straight out. Just like that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and finish up working on this side. I'll come back and show you guys how to close the beadwork, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at how to add another row. So as I'm working, you notice that I am trying to keep both the 2 thread bridges directly across from each other so that my beadwork doesn't become tight on a wrong angle on this bead. So just take your time, reposition your thread bridges if you need to. Use that stop bead down here at the bottom to help you maintain the tension. Whatever works best for you so that you can keep this beautiful linear line of beads on the same plane on opposite sides of the bead. So I finished adding the beads around this pearl that I'm working on. And now I am up close to the end here, and I need to figure out if I've got room to put 1 more bead to close this gap right here, or if it's going to cause my work to go off plane and I should go ahead and sacrifice a little bit of a gap and close the beadwork first. So unfortunately, there is no better way to check it out other than the trial and error. I think I can fit 1 more in, so I'm going to pick up 1, come under that little tiny bit of thread bridge I have left. I am going to step up through that bead, and then I am going to take a look before I close the beadwork to see if it's bulging out or if it is going to be okay. So now that I have that bead in place, here's my first bead, here's my last bead. I think I'm okay to go ahead and connect those 2 beads together. It's going to be very, very tight. And I'm not sure if I want to make that bead fit in there or not. So basically, I think I'm going to pull it off. I don't want my beadwork to bulge, and I'll show you what I mean. If I were to close this up by coming down through the first bead, so we're exiting the top of the last bead. To close the beadwork, we would come down through, from top to bottom, through our first bead. Right here. We will pull that together and add our thread bridge between the top of those 2 beads. We would step back up through the bottom of the last bead right here to put a thread bridge at the bottom. And when I pull that together like that, I'm not going to pull it really tight because you can see that there is really not enough room for that bead right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and take this bead back off. To do that, I am going to unthread the needle from my working thread, take the bead off, and then rethread my needle. So let me do that, and I'll come back and we'll close the beadwork. So all I did was I unthreaded the needle right off of my working thread. I picked the thread bridges out between that new bead and my first bead, and then I pulled off that last bead. So now I'm sitting here with this is my last bead and this is my first bead. So what I'm going to do to close the beadwork now is I am just going to come down through the first bead. I am going to go back up through that last bead from bottom to top. But before I pull that through, I'm going to pull down tight on that one thread, exiting the bottom of the first bead, and hold on to it while I pull all of this loose thread through. And then when I get close to the top, I can let it go. Now you can see that I have a tiny little bit of a gap between those two beads. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work to tighten that up. I'm going to come right back down through my first bead again. I'm going to pull nice and snug. I am going to go back up through the last bead one more time. And get into the last bead here. So I'm going back up through the last bead once again, and now I'm going to pull really secure, and that closes up that little bit of gap between those beads. And now that I've closed the beadwork, I'm actually already in position to start a new row. I probably should have chosen a little bit darker bead, but because I was working on a project, I thought, what the heck, I would go ahead and just use the ones I weren't using. But we're going to switch over to these delicas this time, and this might make it a little easier for you guys to see. So now I'm ready to start a new row. I'm going to pick up 2 beads and let those drop down to the beadwork. So because I know that even though these beads are very similar in size, I know that I need to increase this beadwork just a little bit, because I'm actually going to be adding a little bit bigger row, a little bit bigger diameter row of beads to this existing circle of beads. So I'm going to do an increase right here at the start. So I've picked up my 2 beads. Instead of like we normally would skip over to this second thread bridge, I am going to just come right under that very first thread bridge here, right next to where those 2 beads are sitting. I'm going to pull the beads down. I'm going to step up through my second bead here on the left because I'm sewing to the left. And now I can straighten my bead up by coming down through the first bead and then passing back up through that second bead again. And here I have already created my thread bridge between the top and the bottom of those 2 delicas, and I'm ready to carry on, just adding 1 bead at a time. Now, because we will be working an increase here and there to account for the fact that we have a wider area to cover with this row of beads, we're going to have to learn to use our own judgment about when to add an increase. So the easiest way to determine that is to pick up your bead and let it fall down right against the beadwork like this. You can pull the thread to the back or the front so that it comes down in a line behind the bead like that, and determine where is going to be the best place, the best thread bridge, in other words, to go under in order to stand that bead up right next to the previous second bead that we just sewed on. So I wound up going, because I used the first thread bridge here to add those 2 beads, I knew automatically that I can go under the second thread bridge on the base. But it's a good habit to get into for taking the time to look at where you're going to be positioning the bead. So let's do it again. We're going to pick up this bead and we're going to drop it down here to the beadwork. We're going to pull it over to position it where it should fall up against the base. We're going to pay attention to which thread bridge that is closest to that spot. So in this instance, I am skipping over to the next thread bridge yet again and going under, positioning that bead right beside the previous ones, and stepping up. If you were to keep going around this and just continuously going to the next thread bridge, to the next thread bridge, what you're going to notice is that you will have some noticeable gaps in between beads. So for example, it's probably getting close to time for me to do an increase. So if I carry this bead down and stand it up, you can see the next thread bridge is all the way over here. While the closest thread bridge to where the bead lines up on a straight line is the same thread bridge that I just used, right here next to this existing bead. So I would just go under that same thread bridge one more time. Pull the bead up into position. And then just step up. No gap. On the next one, I'm going to know, because I've already used that one twice, that I can safely go into this next thread bridge right here on the side. And that's how I'm going to continue working this next row. As you become more familiar with working with brick stitch on a bead or a frame and adding additional rows, especially in a round, you will be able to judge more accurately when you need to reuse the thread bridge and when you can safely skip over to the next thread bridge. Good rule of thumb is that it's going to be at least every second or third bead, because you're increasing the work, that you're going to need to do an increase here on the using the same thread bridge twice. That's how you create the increase. So I've skipped over to that next thread bridge here. When I stand my bead up, we'll see if it's looking good. And it is. It looks pretty decent. No huge gaps or anything like that. Another thing you want to pay attention to is how loose these threads get in between these new beads that you're adding. You see that little thread sticking up just a little bit right there. I can go back and tighten that up, but because I'm going to come through and do another round, I'm not going to worry about it too awful much. If that were going to be the outside edge of my beadwork, I would go through and tighten that up. And the way you do it is you go to the bead in front and pull. Go to the bead in front of that and pull. And work your way all the way down to where your working thread is and pull. And now you can't see that thread. All right, so let's do a couple more. And also on this round, because we've got beads all along the edge of the purl, we really don't have to worry about jumping over the hole. We have thread bridges between every bead now. So we can just basically safely work our way back around. So here's a spot where I need to do an increase. I'm going to reuse the same thread bridge. And then I'm going to step up. And because I just reused one, I know on this stitch I can just jump to the next thread bridge right here. All right, so just keep working. I strongly recommend that if you're very new to this stitch that you take the time to pick your bead up, drop it into position, and see which thread bridge lines up closest with the bottom of that bead. And that's going to help you determine which one to poke your needle through as you add each new bead of this row. Pull your thread straight out and keep your tension nice and even so that your beads all sit on a flat plane coming around the bead. So here's a quick tip. If you notice that you're getting gaps between the beads, then you know you're not doing enough increases. If you notice that your beads are popping off from to the left or the right off of this plane, then you're going to know that you're doing too many increases. And if you decide that you need to work backwards and take off a bead or two, when you're using this particular technique, I suggest taking the needle off, removing the beads, rethreading your needle, and then working back forward. If the stop bead gets in your way as you get to the bottom, you can slide the stop bead down the tail thread just a little bit and get it out of the way. Once you get past that area, you can tighten it back up if you need the stop bead to help you with your tension. So here I am, and I have worked my way around, and I've added a bead to my last thread bridge. And now it's really easy to see that I don't need to add an extra bead in here. So I'm just going to close the beadwork. I'm going to take the needle and come down through the very first bead of the row. Pull nice and snug. I'm going to step back up through the last bead of the row. Before I pull it, I'm going to pull tight on the thread exiting that first bead. And I'm going to hold it with my hand while I pull all of this loose thread around. And that's going to help me maintain tension and get those beads situated together nicely. I like to go back through one more time just to tighten everything up and make sure that I don't have any weird looking threads sitting here above the top of the bead. So we'll go right back down through one and right back up through two. I use my fingernail as I pull that thread so that everything comes together really nice and smooth. I'm going to look along my planes, make sure that all of my beads are sitting nicely on the plane and that there's nobody poking around and looking too off to the side or anything, because I've paid close attention as I worked. And that is how you add the extra row using an increase to account for the bigger space you have to grow the beadwork outwards in a circle. The diameter gets bigger and bigger with each additional row. So I got one more row to do to get this little beautiful bead to the place where I can embellish it like I did my previous one. And so if I want to add additional rows, I have the same concepts that I had last time. I'm going to start the row with an increase. I'm going to pick up my 2 beads, and I'm going to go under the very first thread bridge, because I know that my work will naturally need to increase with each row ever so slightly. And I'm going to try to keep my beads sitting on the plane all the way around the center of my pearl, and make sure that I don't have so many beads that I have beads popping out to the left or right, and that I don't have any noticeable gaps here between my beads. Once I get all the way back around, I will go ahead and determine if I need to add one last bead to fill my final gap. I'll step up into that last bead. And then we would repeat the steps to close the beadwork by attaching the last bead to the first bead at the bottom and at the top. And if we wanted additional rows, we would just repeat those steps over and over. All right, so that is a close-up look at how to do brick stitch on a bead, how to determine where you need to do increases so that you don't have any gaps, so that all of your beads fall onto the same pretty plane as you work around the bead like a ring around Saturn. All right, folks, that is it for today. I hope you like this tutorial. Give it a thumbs up if you like it. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and head over to the alluringboutique.com and check out some of the great content that I've been adding this year. There were lots more in-depth tutorials, lots of great articles, and plenty to learn and do. And that's it, folks. So thanks for watching, and have a wonderful day.